All right. What's up, everybody? This is G-Kit, Torterra Man, co-founder of banto.tv alongside my friend Fado, and this is the long-awaited game engine. So I want to kind of run you through what making a game and starting a game and troubleshooting a game actually looks like. So, as you may have seen in the past 2 days, we kind of did drop a little video. But let's go ahead and get started. So, as you can see, I've already got 2 games made. And rather than go through one of these, let's go ahead and just create a new game. And create a game. Alright, so we created our trivia demo. So the way the game works is every game starts at start. So we can go ahead and enter this. Eventually there'll be a nice preview of like the flow of the game and what that looks like. But for now we can just go into the start guy. Alright, so now we are on the screen of the actual engine builder. So I want to give you a quick little tutorial of what you can find here. So first, let's look at the actual block canvas or the workspace. So we have these tabs right here. So first we have the host conditions, and essentially what this is you will drop a block on here, which will, depending on some sort of state value, it will show the host a certain screen. The same can be said about the player conditions. Depending on that player's state value or just a general state value, we can show the players different things. The flow control you can kind of think of as listeners. So it is constantly listening for some state variable to change or to pass a certain threshold, in which case it will then execute a series of actions. The sandbox is just like a playground. You can drag blocks on here and build certain things. You can plan it out before you actually want to put it inside of one of these permanent block houses. So on the left, we can see the different tabs of our types of blocks. We can start with logic, this brown square. So logic is to do things like comparisons, like equals, not equals, greater, etc., as well as these logic gates. And, or, XOR, we kind of have the whole list here. Some of these could be made in combination with just ands and ors, but yes, we have all of those. And then the variables are for things like custom values. If you don't want to have to create a state value and then set it equal to something to display it, you can just drop in custom numbers like this. Or access the current time, or things like we want to get the index of an item in a list, or we want to find the index of an item in a list. Then we can do stuff like that. Check existence, is something inside, get the length, or sort a list, things like that. Math, pretty obvious. Add, subtract, all of these operations can be found on this math tab. And then the UI, these are the blocks that will actually show up to different players. So container is kind of our general purpose. We can style it, add things inside, stuff like that. And then these are kind of some pre-made templates that we've created to make getting started a little bit easier. Component lists for things like lists that are dependent or that have to be iterated through some kind of parameter, or a component list, so manually just adding your own blocks to a list, conditional. So this is the only time you can actually render a conditional on the client side, and then things like buttons. And eventually there will be things like text inputs, text areas, sliders, etc., etc. So before we get into state, first I'll pull up this state data slide or sidebar like this. So these are the variables. You can kind of think of this as the database of the entire game. So in this first starting state or our global state, these are variables which can be accessed inside of any state throughout the game. But if I was to create a new state and add variables to it, then that could only be accessed inside of that specific state. And there are some things like sending data or variables to the next state, but that's something I can talk about later. And then down here we can do things like we can add a question set like this, and so that now we know we have to attach a question set pack or list to be able to play this game. Do the same thing with a prompt set down the line. We can add our own variables like so, define a type for it, and then that is something that we'll be able to modify within the scope of the game, or of course, when it pertains to global set, that's something we'll be able to access or modify anyway. Awesome, so these state variables show up as blocks like this, so we can actually drag, set, or modify these values inside of our game. So the flow, this is sort of what I talked about as it pertains to host conditions. We can drop a layout condition like this. So if some value exists, then we'll show them that. And if we wanted to add another condition, so kind of like an else, or else if something else is true, then we can show the host something else. And this is the exact same for the playout, and then eventually flow control. But I'll get to that in a second. So finally, style. This goes hand in hand with this container block because this is how we actually get these completely customizable styles. These work in the form of CSS, if you have any experience with that, by creating a style and then basically creating CSS in the form of JSON so that we can actually customize a container to look like how we want it to. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So to start with our host, we can, since this is the start and it's going to look like the lobby, then we know this is, and we kind of already have a lobby, which we like Banto games to look like. We've created this pre-made template right here called the lobby template. And so we can drop that in right here. Also, because this is a start and it's the lobby, the host is really only going to have one single screen. So for something like this, I like to just drop in one of these custom booleans because this will always be true, and that's it. And we're always going to show them this lobby during the start state. Awesome. So another feature of this is sometimes going through these tabs can take a lot of time, and you know, the navigation isn't always the most pleasant thing. So we also have the search bar. So if we want to find something like the room code, then here it is, room code right here. We need a button to go right here, and we'll get to there in a second. Actually, we'll do that right now. Okay, so what we could do is just drop this button in as it is, but you can kind of think as the button and eventually the text input and the slider and what other inputs as purely functional. These have no styling attached to them. They just allow you to click something and execute an action upon being clicked. So what we can do is just throw a container on it so that we can eventually style it and then put the button inside of it. So now this button will be styled according to this style right here. So to create a style, we just have to open up the style tab and then click this button, add a style. Like I said, it is CSS classes in the form of JSON. We have disabled some selectors and attributes, mostly for safety and security purposes. Eventually we will add some of these back so you can get even more customizable. But for now we kind of just have a blanket safety rule, which is most of those attributes and selectors are going to be disabled. But there's still a lot you can do. Alright, so for something like this button, let's just call this the purple button. And it's going to be in the form of JSON, so we have to create these brackets, and then we can start adding some attributes to it. So let's say that I want the height of this to be 100 pixels. We'll do 125 pixels, and the width of it to be 175 pixels. Let's add a color, so this is going to be the text color of just white, so the text is going to be white. And let's say the background color is going to be, I'm just picking a hex code right there, which I know is a decent purple, like this. And let's give it a border radius of, let's say, 16 pixels, kind of just arbitrary values I'm naming off. A border color of black, a border width of 4 pixels, a display of flex. Let's justify the content to center, and then align items center. As we all know, centering a div is very difficult, but this will just allow the text inside of that button to be centered. Let's then, again, text a line to center so that text is fully centered, especially during an overflow. And then, as any button should, let's set the cursor to pointer. And then we want this button to signify it's being hovered over. And we can do that through this selector, kind of similar to styled components. If we do at and then :hover, then now, let's say when it's being hovered over, we want our background color to be, let's get another kind of arbitrary purple color, like so. And then we can set our blur color to maybe something a little lighter. Awesome. And then what we can add is a slight animation so that as it changes during the hover, it is not quite as, oh, you gotta look at, oops, sorry, I got a text. All right, so let's just do transition, and if you've experienced with CSS, this should be quite familiar to you. All 0.2s ease in, out. So everything that changes is going to have this transition. It's going to take about 0.2 seconds, and it's going to ease in and out. Awesome. So this looks good, and if there's an issue, we would probably get a syntax error, and this wouldn't work, but looks like it works fine. So we can always edit this down the line if we don't like how it looks, and if we want to get rid of this because it takes up space, we can delete it. But that looks good, so let's drag this into our style slot. All right, and then let's add some content. So we can just throw in a custom string here because this doesn't have to be dependent on any variables, and let's just say start game. And on click, we want to do something. So what do we want to do? So what you could do is just set the state inside of here, set the state to whatever the next state is, which is probably going to be question. But what I like to do is to just keep all of those states inside of this flow control. So what I'm going to do is create a new variable, and looks like it's already here, which is started. I believe this just gets auto-generated. So when this is clicked, then we can set, I like to use a search bar because it's faster, we can set the started to true. Oops. And if you wanted to change this, you just click this button and it would change, but we want that to be true. So another thing I haven't mentioned yet, but is that you notice that you don't set any default values here. You can kind of assume the question set default value is going to be the question set that's attached to it. But for the other things, you can kind of think of them as being set as their negative values. So a started Boolean would be false, or a default room code would just be an empty string. A default settings, which is an object, would just be an empty object, and so on and so on. Awesome. So we want to set this started to true, and then let's do something where we create the main content. So the main content, for the purpose of this template, you can kind of think of as the list of players at the bottom. So we know that we want it to be a grid. So let's go ahead and drop a container here. We know this will be the grid. Also, when this stuff gets kind of in the way and you're done working on it, we can just close it up so we don't have to look at it. So we know that that's going to be a grid, and inside of that is going to be a list. So here's where we're going to dynamically iterate through our players eventually. And for each player, we want to display a button because we want to be able to kick these players. So we're going to drop a container so we can style it, and then a button, like so. Awesome. So how do we iterate through a list of something? Well, we've dropped this iterative component list, and we can iterate through either a list of anything or a dynamic field. So a dynamic you can think of as an object, but where it has a key, a dynamic key. So for players, you can think of that as an object where the key is the session ID. So if we find our players, like so, it'll automatically populate these parent-only blocks right here. So here's the key, which is why it's in brackets, it's session ID. And then we can also look at its individual attributes, so the player's name or the player's score. Awesome. So let's drop the content of the button is obviously going to be the player's name because we want to see who's in the game. So what happens when we kick on that player? We want the host to be able to kick that player out. And now we have to kick this player based on their session ID. And so we know that for each button, and if we press on that button, we want to kick the player that session ID is associated with it. Awesome. We can drop some blocks right here. Do we want to sort it? No, I don't think we need to sort it, and then we don't need to reverse it either. Awesome. So let's first of all style this the button in which we'd use to kick the player. So let's create a new style, and let's call this maybe strike through button. And I actually have some CSS already loaded up, like this. So this is the text color, which is going to be yellow. Here's a font size of 30 pixels. I figured that looked good. We made it bold. We made the text line center. We made it a cursor pointer. And then when it hovered, it would transition to a black color, as well as having a line through. And then it would increase in size. And we made this all transition. So making it red with a line through and bigger would kind of make the host be like, are you sure you want to do this? So let's add this style like so, and then we can style the button like that. Awesome. So now we need to style the actual list. So let's create a new style, and we're going to just call this the lobby grid. And again, I have some pre-made JSON CSS to make this a little bit faster. So it is going to be a grid, and we're going to make 4 different columns, hence the 1 fraction, 1 fraction, 1 fraction, 1 fraction. They're going to have a gap of at least 10 pixels. We're going to set the width to 100%, so fill up that entire space. And we're going to set the max height to 100%. We're not going to set the height explicitly so that the height of it will just continue to grow. But when it gets to that max height, then it's going to allow you to scroll. Awesome. So let's create that lobby grid, and we can now set the style like so. Awesome. So as far as the host, I think this looks pretty good, and there isn't much more work we need to do. So looks good, and now let's continue to the player conditions. So again, for the starting state, all we have to do is set it to true, because there's only ever going to be one state when it starts. So then we're going to show a player, and something we've done is added just like general templates for the screen. So, you know, when you want to show them the score and the room code, but then customize everything inside, you can just use this player screen template. Also, as a part of the player layout condition, we have that player session ID so that we can reference attributes related to that player inside of that player's layout condition. So you can kind of think of it as self. So we want to give them the room code. We need to give them their score. So now, looking at something like this, how do we know what their score actually is? Well, the only way to get that player-specific score is to give it the key. So we need that session ID as the key. And then we need to set the main content to, let's just make it a, we can actually give it a container, and containers can also just stylize certain strings. And for them, we'll just say, you're in, and maybe waiting for the host to start. Awesome. So now let's create another style that is going to be kind of like the header text for these players. And let me pull up the CSS. Let's just call this player header text. And we can copy and paste that in, so it's going to be bold, it's going to be center, and it's going to be white with a font size of 25 pixels. So let's add this guy and drop it in like so. Cool. So now for flow control, we can drop in one of these flow control, and now we are waiting for something to happen. So we are waiting for that started variable right here, because let's say it defaults to false. We want it we're waiting for it to be true. So all we have to do is say if started, like so. So if started, then we're going to do a series of actions. And all we would need to do is set the next flow state. But the flow state doesn't exist yet because we haven't created any other states. So let's go back to this game editor and create a new state. So it comes up with a random name, and when we go into look at it, we can actually change the name of that state right here. So let's change this to question. This is going to be the question state. Awesome. So we can look at the question state right here, but we don't actually know what question we want to display here. So as part of the input data, let's say that we need the question index. So what question do we actually want to show? This is going to be a number like that, and that should be good enough. As you can see, also we have this player data, so this is automatically made. So basically, what kind of data are the players going to create or contribute? Okay. And so they are going to contribute their selection index, so which option are they going to choose from the actual questions list of options, and that's going to be a number, as well as what's their time going to be, because we want their score to be based off of their time. So let's say this is their selection time. And that is also going to be a number, because time is going to be represented in the form of a number. So that is our player data, and that should be good. Also, the initialization time is automatically provided and then instantiated. So right when we switch to a new state, we're going to know when that time started if we want to reference it later. Cool. So let's go ahead and open up our host conditions, our layout conditions. So let's drop a layout condition here. So as it pertains to trivia, there's only ever going to be one state, so let's just set this to default Boolean value, and then we're going to show them the host screen template. So for this, we need to give them a room code. They need to have a button. So we want to style this, so let's drop a container and then a button. Like that. How much time is going to be remaining? So the host screen template, by the way, is kind of the main content on the left, taking up like 70% of the screen or 80% of the screen, and then that sidebar on the right where we can do things like click the skip button, show the responses, and like time remaining and stuff like that, as you've seen in our previous games. So the time remaining, we'll actually have to do a calculation. So time subtract, and eventually we'll have things like settings where each host can individually customize the game on top of the engine, but for now we will just do, let's just say the default time is 60 seconds. So the time remaining is going to be another subtract operation, which is going to be time, and oops, we can actually drop that over here. And so time is in the form of milliseconds. So if we want to say 60 seconds, then this is actually going to be more like 60,000 milliseconds. So the time remaining is going to be 60 seconds minus the current time minus the initialization time. Like that. So as the current time grows and gets bigger, this is going to get bigger, and so 60 seconds minus this number will show us the time remaining. Because obviously when it first starts, the current time and the initialization time will be 0. How many responses? Let's get the length of the player data, because as this populates, it will grow in size, and this will show us the length of it. And then our main content is going to be, we've already created a trivia template, like so. Again, this is something we just made to make getting started a little bit easier. So the index is going to be from our input data, so that's our index. The length, or how many questions are inside of our set, so that we know where we are in terms of the list of questions. We can do the length, so let's get the length of our question set, like so. All right, so the question, this is a string, so it's actual like question being asked. We can just do the text of our question, which is based on our index, because we need to get the text of a certain question inside of that question set, so we need to provide it an index. And we can do the same thing with the image and drop the image like so. And then what are the options? Well, we can just grab the question attribute of options, and we also have to provide an index like so. So this makes it pretty simple. So now the sidebar button is basically going to be our skip. So let's actually create a new variable. Let's call this is skipped. Like so. Oh, we want this to be a Boolean. Is skipped. Let's make that a Boolean. Cool. So the content, very similarly, is going to be, let's just say, skip. And the style, we can just make it the same purple button. We'll keep this consistent. These are global. We can access these styles at any state. And then on click, oops, we want to set this, we want to set the skipped value, oops, to true, like so. Cool. This looks pretty good for our host state. Maybe we'll tweak something now and then. As you can see, we didn't really have to style any of this stuff because we've made these pre-made templates, so for some things you don't have to worry about it. All right, let's look at our player conditions. So this is the first time we'll actually have two different conditions. So let's add a player layout condition to this first one, and then to this second one. So this is where it's good to talk about the sense of hierarchy, or maybe more so priority. So the priority of these conditions goes from top to bottom. So if this one is true, then it'll show this one. Even if this one is also true, even if player conditions number 2 is also true, it will first show, or it will always show the one that is true first. So basically there's two states on this question state for the player. It is, one, have you not answered the question, therefore the player needs to select an option, or that player has already selected an option, so we will show them nothing, or maybe a message. So how I like to do this is to put the condition up top that will be default, or that will be false initially, and then set the bottom one to just true. So true, oops. So this one will always be true, and therefore as the game is running, this one will be default true, and so this one will probably be shown first. But the second that their player data, that their instance of player data, so this player's data itself, when that exists, because it defaults to not existing at all, then we're going to show them the we're going to show them a generic template, just being, let's give them a room code, and let's give them their score from their session ID with a main content of, let's do this container again, and a style of the player header text. And let's say all it's going to be is locked in, like so. And so when they've already answered a question, that's what they'll see. As long as their player data exists, meaning they've already answered the question, then they're just going to see a string that says locked in. So now we can minimize that and focus on this next one. Awesome. So they haven't answered the question, and they need to. So now what do we want to show them? Let's again give them this generic player screen template. And let's just add in the room code and the score of that player. And we can then, so we want to show them two things, or I guess, yeah, mostly two things, which is one, we want to show them the question itself if they want to read it on their own device, as opposed to looking up at the screen. We want to show them that question, as well as we want to show them the grid of potential options. So this is where it can get a little complicated, but I'll show you how I want to implement it. And it can be implemented in a variety of ways, but this is how I kind of like to do it. So first, let's give them a container. This is what is going to be the column that's going to house both the question text itself, as well as the option grid. So inside of here, we're going to add a manual component list, because there's going to be two things. We don't have to iterate over anything, and it's going to have two slots. So the first of which is going to be it's going to be just the content, or it's first of all going to be the question itself, and then it is also going to be the options. So let's do for the content, let's say it is the text of the question, index, and then we need to give it a style, so let's just make it the player header text so it kind of stays consistent. And then for the grid down here, let's do a component list, but this time we actually do have to iterate, because now we're going to iterate over the options. We want to give them all of the different options. And similar to the dynamic, actually let's close this out because that one's done. Similar to the dynamic that we placed in before with the players, this works similarly for just a list, because this is a list of strings. We have the index as kind of the key and the instance as just being a string. So this instance is, an option inside of that list. Cool. Awesome. So before we get into here, let's do some styling first of all. So because this is going to be a grid, let's make a new style, which is going to be, let's call this the player option grid, like so. And then let me find the CSS that I have pre-made, and let's drop it in like so. Cool. So that looks good. There's only going to be two columns, and it's going to take up the full screen. I have the max height set to a little lower because the height is going to fill up to that height with no overflow, and that should be good. So let's drop this for that, and then that will be for the grid, but we also need to style the column, which contains both the text and the grid itself. So for this one, let's just call this a generic column, so we can use this later. Let's do generic player column. Right, and what do we want this to look like? We want this to take up the full screen. It's going to be a flex column, and it's going to be justified with space between, so that there can be spacers automatically put there. And let's add a little gap and a center, and we'll add some padding. Great. So now let's drop that to the parent container, and now we can actually go ahead and look at this component list. Awesome. So the key here is we want each question or each button to be a different color. So how do we actually go about doing that? Well, we can make use of this conditional component. So if the index of that option is a certain value, then let's make it one color. Otherwise, let's make it a different value. But maybe not if it is equal to a certain value, but if the modulus of it or the remainder of it is a certain value. So let's say we want it to alternate between red, blue, green, yellow. Red, blue, green, yellow. So basically all we have to do is divide it by the amount of colors we have in the list. So in this case it'll be 4, and if the remainder of it is equal to 0, 1, 2, or 3, then we can set it to a certain color. And we can do that by, actually I forgot, because of the parent being able to pass attributes to the children, what will make this even easier is if we make a parent style that doesn't talk about colors whatsoever, but that can pass kind of the generic style to it. So let's make a new style called question option button. And this we'll add some CSS like this. So this is a button with a pointer, and it'll align the items to the center. And actually something I forgot, but maybe let's make the text center as well. Oop, it's not align text, it's text align. Awesome. So let's add this right here so the children inside will inherit these features. Awesome. So now we can make these styles for each option button. So let's first of all make one that's just a red background. And this will be simple. Let's just do this. Let's call this option button red background. If we want to use that in the future, let's actually just keep it generic. Let's also add a blue background. And throw in our blue background like so. We're going to need a green background. And pass in our green background as well. And finally, we need a yellow background. So over here, yellow background, paste that in, and there's our yellow background. Awesome. So how do we get the remainder of the index as it relates to the length of the amount of colors we have? So let's drop in this conditional component. So if we want to go in the order of red, blue, green, yellow. Red, blue, green, yellow, right? Or no, sorry, red, blue, yellow, green. Red, blue, yellow, green. So if, well, first we need an equals because that's going to be the parent, but if the modulus or the remainder of this index mod 4 is equal to 0. Oops, we just need another number. Then we're going to show this same button. We're going to show, we're going to style that button. So we need that with a button. And we want that to be the red button. Cool. So if if the remainder of 4 is equal to 0, then we want it to be red. So let's show them that. And the content is going to be the instance because that's what the option is going to be. And on click, we can set the player let's do selection index of, let's minimize some of these so we can go up top. Oh, variable options. Oh, we forgot to pass in that selection index. Oops. Oh, we forgot to pass in the question index, and we can minimize that. And we need their session ID. Let's minimize these a little bit further. We need their session ID. Then we set their session ID to the number, which is the index that they selected, which would just be 0. Cool. Comparison equals index, yes. Okay. And then what we also want to do is set, and we can do multiple actions, and they'll go in that order. We want to set their selection time of their specific, so we got to do that session ID to the current time, like so. Otherwise, and instead of having else if, you can kind of just do these conditional components on top of each other. So it's like else, or if else, and then inside of there another if else, and so on. So we can kind of chain it. Yeah, this conditional component, and the exact same thing. If equals is mod number mod 4, because that's length of our list, is equal to 1, then we want to show them. Let's do another container so we can style it. With the content being that instance. And on click, or first we need to style it with the blue background. And then similar to what we did up here, we want to set their selection index to that and their selection time to the current time. So I'm going to go ahead and fill out the rest of these, and then I will be back to go over it. Awesome. So finish up those guys. So now let's go through this. So we're going to show a container which is which has the parent of the question option button, so it styles everything inside of it. And if the modulus of index to 4 is 0, then we're going to show them the red background. Otherwise, we're going to look again to see if the modulus is equal to 1, and if so, we're going to show them the blue background. Otherwise, another condition, so if it's equal to 2, then we're going to show them the yellow background. And then finally, we don't have to do a comparison again. We can just say if it's none of those three, we're going to show them green. Awesome, so this looks good, and in this case, I think we're done. All right, so now when we go back, we can actually look at our start state, and now inside of our flow control, we want to set the state now to question, because we've made that state and added its input data. Now we need to pass it, and now we can set it to something, but we need to pass it a question index. So because we know the first index of the list is going to be 0, we can just set it to 0, like so. Awesome. Now the start state is done, and the question state is done, except for the flow. So back to question. Let's look at the flow control. So when the next state we know is going to be the leaderboard. Actually, I'm going to go pee. So the next state is going to be the leaderboard. So for the flow control, we're going to be waiting on 2 things. Or 3 things. So we already had this is skipped. So let's add this flow control block, and we're going to be waiting on 3 things. So let's add some ors in there, because if any of them are true, then we want to execute this. So if is skipped is true, then this is going to execute because we skipped the question. Or the time limit threshold has been passed. Oops, I need to do greater subtract current time minus the init time is greater than this value, which we said was 60,000 milliseconds or 60 seconds. Or we can just say the length, greater if the length of the player data, we can do these two get lengths, because if the length of the player data is greater than or equal to the length of the amount of players we have, then everybody's answered. We can just go ahead and skip. So, but the leaderboard is going to need the list of players. Is going to need either the player data, or to make it easier, we could just give them the a list of players which are, who got it right, so that we can say, hey, they increased in score, or just they got it correct. So inside of our state data, to make this easier, let's create a new item, which let's call this correct players, and this is going to be a list of strings, like so. So then we're going to do this. Inside of our flow, we can do an iterative action. So think of this as a for loop. So for item inside of here, we can do these things. So let's add this in here, and then we are going to iterate through player data. So for the player, or the session ID in player data, as well as their attributes, what are we going to do to these? So first of all, let's add in our if-else. If their selection index is inside of the list of correct options, then we want to add them to the list and also increase their score. So if selection index is in correct options, and what's the index of that? Well, that's going to be our question index. Then what we're going to do is add their session ID. Oh, we have to add that first, so correct players. And then now we can add their session ID. We can add their session ID to those correct players. And then the other thing we can do is we can set their score. So add that down there. We can set their score. So the score of who? The score of this player that we've just iterated through. To, let's do their current score. Of their session ID plus how long did it take them? We'll say, so their current score, because we want to add it on top of it, to, let's say, the subtract, and kind of do what we've been doing, which is another subtract. We need the number 60,000 minus their selection time. Oh, actually, I can just do this. Their selection time minus the init time, like so. Cool. So now we are increasing their score, and that should be good. Otherwise, we don't need to do anything, and then what we do after this iterative action is set the state to leaderboard, which we can do after we create the actual leaderboard state. So let's go ahead and create another state, random name, venture in, change this to something we can actually understand, which is leaderboard. So the input data, we need the question index again. Question index, this is going to be a number, as well as we need the correct player list. this is going to be a list of strings like so, and then we can pass it in since we've generated it from the last one. And then similar to the last one, we can skip this leaderboard because we're going to have some time spent like looking at the statistics. So let's just create another variable called is skipped. We'll set this to a Boolean value like so, and that should be good. And now, after we've done this, we can go back to our game editor. Let's open up our question, and inside of our flow control, after all of this, let's set the state to leaderboard. The question index is going to be the same index like so, and the correct players are going to be our correct players, which we've just generated right here. Awesome. Back to game editor, and now let's work on question. So the host is only, oops, not question, I meant leaderboard. So now, similar to how it's been so far, a host layout condition, layout condition, we're only going to show them one screen ever, so let's just say this is always true. Then we're going to show the host, let's just do that template again. The host screen template, and let's fill in these values. So we know the room code, the time, let's say for the leaderboard, they can have 10 seconds to look before it automatically goes. So right here, the time, current time, oops, that should go there, minus the init time, and this will be 10,000 milliseconds or 10 seconds. And then the responses, let's just do the length of the correct player, so how many people actually got it correct. And then our main content is going to be something a little bit more complicated, but first let's do this button. So let's add our container. And the text, we need the button, so we can do the action. Add the string, let's just say skip. And on click, we're going to set skipped to true, like so. And the style is going to be the same as always, and it's going to be our purple button. Nice. All right, so for our main content, we want to show the leaderboard. So we want to give a list of the players in their positions, their scores, and they want to be sorted based on that. So let's add in a container so we can style this list. And inside of there, we're going to iterate, component list, like so, and we're going to iterate through the players. And something we haven't used yet, but we can sort it based on an attribute, so let's sort it based on their score. The component is going to be another styled, and this one's actually going to be a row. All right, so now I'm going to fill in this really quickly so this video doesn't get super long, but I'll show you what that looks like. Awesome, so now that I've finished this one out, we're iterating by the players with their attributes, and we're going to sort by their score because we want to be the higher ones up top. And we're going to show them, this is in the form of a column. I added some styles for that sort of thing. And then inside of each item in the column, it's just going to be a row which shows their name, and then a conditional component, which is going to be if they're correct, so their session ID is in the correct players, and we're going to say they're correct, and we'll give them some green text, and if they're incorrect, we'll give them some red text and a message. And finally, their score. And then I just style this in the form of a row with this leaderboard row style right here. Awesome. And then similar to that, we will show them just one screen with a conditional component that will determine if they have a message that says they did it or if they got it wrong. So I'm going to do that real quick, and I'll be right back. Awesome. To finish, as you can see, there's only one condition, so it's always true. And we're going to show them the classic player screen template. And then the main content will just be a piece of text, so it inherits some of those text attributes from this player header text container. And if they're in the correct players, we'll say you got it with some green text, and otherwise we'll say not quite with some red text. And then now we can move to flow control. So let's drop in a flow control here. Cool. So now what we're looking for is an OR, because we want to say we're going to execute this if we have skipped, or if the time, actually subtract, greater time, subtract again, over here, if that is greater than or equal to, so let's do the current time minus the initialization time is greater than or equal to the, let's say 10,000 milliseconds or 10 seconds, because that's how long until it auto skips. Or they click the skipped button. Then what we'll do is an if else. So if the is equal to, if the question index is equal to the length of the player, or the length of the question set, minus 1. If that's equal to that, then we know there are no more questions left, and therefore we would need to set the state to final. So we want to show them the final rankings and the final leaderboards. Otherwise, what we can do, and we'll do this in a second after we make that state. Otherwise, all we're going to do is set the state, inside of flow, we're going to set the state back to question with the current question index plus 1. Right? Because we just want to increase it by 1 so we can just move on to the next question. So do what we have to do here in a second once we create that final leaderboard. So this looks good. And let's go back to the game editor and let's create our final state. So let's change this to final. And what we want in here is we want a map of the players to their rankings. So let's call this player rankings, and it is going to be in a dynamic with the key of session ID. And we need their place. So what is their place going to be? It will be a number, like so. Awesome. And then I don't believe there's anything else we need inside of the data, but we will figure that out in a second. Oh, yes, we need a variable to determine if we want to reset. So is reset, let's make this a Boolean and add that to our data. Awesome. So our host conditions, there will only be one, and basically we just want to show the leaderboard. So I will skip right through that. All right, we basically made this very similar to how we made the last leaderboard, except we've added the top to have this final result string with a big header style to show them, well, this is it. And then we went through our players and iterated them and sorting by their score. So the top at the first and the bottom at the last. So now I'll do something similar for the playout conditions. Awesome, so the player conditions are now done, and basically what I've done here is I have said that, or I'm giving them a the regular container text with the header, and I'm telling them what place they finished in. And so the way that I made this work is by creating a list, but then styling them as being inline divs So you can kind of see what that looks like right here. If I display them as inline, rather than being a column or even a row, it'll basically just be like text inside of the same, sentence or paragraph or something. So I know that I'm going to set their place to be actually their index inside of that list. And so if I add 1 to it, then I can get their actual place. So if somebody's, number 0, then they'd show as being first place. For the flow control, I'm just going to wait for is reset to be true. Then all I have to do is restart the game, like so. So to finish this off, let's go to the leaderboard. And inside of here, well, what I need to do is actually create our player rankings. So let's create a new variable called player rankings. And this is going to be dynamic with the session ID as the key. And I did not mean to delete that. Let me do that again. The session ID as the key, and then let's add the place parameter to that, which is going to be a number. Cool. So now, in the case that this is the last question, what we need to do is we need to iterate. So inside of flow, iterative action, for the players inside of the, for player in players, we are going to set the rankings. We're going to set the place of that session ID to, we're going to find the index of their session ID in the sorted list of those players, where we are going to sort by, well, we need a key, and we will set their key to the score, because that is going to be the name of the attribute in which we want to sort by. So after that is done, we have their rankings, then we can finally set the state to final. And then the player rankings, we can just pass in that variable which we've just constructed, which is the player rankings right here, and that is the only thing they need. Awesome. So I think we have finished. I'm going to review and make sure everything looks good, and then I'll show you what starting a game looks like. All right. So now let's go ahead and create some content. So to create content, basically, rather than creating question sets, which are their own, games or prompt sets. For now, it's only question sets, but eventually a lot of problem sets, like you saw in the other games. Basically, you can create these content packs, and so let's call this demo trivia pack, and this is going to be a question set. So now let's go back to the host and see our content, and let's go ahead and edit this. Now, this is not the most beautiful UI. As you can see, a lot of question, and we want comma separated values. It's not the most beautiful UI, and this is going to definitely get better over time. But for now, for the purpose of this demo and functionality, this will be good. So let's make a question. So let's think. What should we make this trivia about? I like cats, so let's make this a cat trivia. So what type of cat is best for those with cat allergies? Let's say the options are the domestic short hair, let's say an English muffin, the Russian blue, or maybe the Sphinx. And obviously the correct options, there can be multiple, but in this case there'll just be one. I will say it is the second, or 0, 1, 2 second index. And that looks good. Let's create another question. Let's say, let's add a funny question in there. How many lives does a cat have? Let's say the options are 1 life, 3 lives, 9 lives, 3 lives, 2 lives. Obviously, everybody knows the answer is 1. And let's add one more question. Let's say, what is another name for a cat's paws? Maybe their toes, or let's say fur fingers, or potentially their kitty claws with a K, and then beans. And so let's say, I don't know, fur fingers sounds good. Let's do index 1 is correct, as well as index 3. 0, 1, 2, 3. So both of those are correct. This looks good. We can go ahead and click save, and everything looks great. All right, I think it might be time to host our game. So we're going to go ahead and click play game right here, and let's click the pack. So we're going to do this demo trivia pack, and let's start this game. So this is going to take a second, because what is happening is it is booting up a completely independent server for your game. I don't want to say y'all aren't good coders, but we do not trust the code or the games that you're making. So basically each game is in its own isolated server instance. So it's booting up, it created the ingress, and well, now we're here. So let's go ahead and join these games. So it's going to be banto.tv/join game. And we'll do the same thing down here. There's not the issue anymore with the session IDs being locally stored, therefore making it very difficult to join your own game on the same tab, especially when browsers share local storage. But anyway, let's go ahead and copy this. So that's our room code, and we'll call this Grant 1. And over here, we'll call this Fake Fado, like so. All right. So you remember designing this, you're in. And we designed this button right here. Obviously this one's quite ugly and you can make it a lot better, but this should be good enough. So if you remember, we made this to strike through text when it's hovered over, and it's got a nice little animation, so it doesn't immediately change, but it gives us a little bit of animation there. So just to test it, let's say we want to kick out Fake Fado. They're not the real Fado. Well, you can see this person is instantly kicked out over here. But let's just go ahead and rejoin, and we'll call this G-Kit. We'll say we're the real G-Kit. Just like that. And all right, we got 2 players in. I think we're good to go. Let's go ahead and start. Okay, just like we intended, what type of cat is best for those with cat allergies? Well, I know G-Kit knows it's going to be the Russian blue. You can see it's counted here. The time is counting down. We can skip if we want. Oh, looks like I made this orange on accident. Oops. Which type of cat is best for those cat allergies? Grant 1 doesn't know, so we're going to say the Sphinx cat. Well, he got it wrong, you got it right, just like we intended with those conditional components, and this person was added a score. We could normalize the score and kind of make it out of 1,000 per question, but who cares? All right, it auto skips, just like we had in the flow conditions. So how many lives does a cat have? We're going to say, well, this time, they get it right, but G-Kit is struggling, so they'll say 3. As you can see, they got less points than this person did because it took them longer to answer. This next one, we're going to do it super quick, the same ones. So what's another name for cat paws? Beans, and this one says fur fingers. Oh, they both got it correct because they were both in those correct options, which we specified. All right, and then after, we can just go ahead and skip to show that, and we skip. Here are our final results. Grant 1 in first place, winning by just under 1,000 points. And this could be much more pretty and it is up to you guys to make that happen. We can restart the game, and from there, it's over. So guys, yeah, this is the game engine. I really hope to see like the great stuff that y'all are able to do with this. There's a lot of things that we need to fix over time, for sure. First of all, creating the engine is not ideal. It's not super intuitive, it's a little ugly, and it's kind of annoying. But that is going to get better over time. We hope that the value that it brings you in being able to make your custom games like that is going to be worth, you know, some of the hiccups that exist. But me and Doug are committed to making it better and better over time. Please join the Discord if you're not already in it, and ask, you know, as many questions as you need about how it works and how we can help you get set up. We're going to be coming along with more videos and potentially some documentation for how it works. And please leave suggestions and advice in like the respective Discord channels. We know that this game engine is, you know, pretty much in a beta, and it's going to break. It's not going to work as intended, and, you know, it's going to crash a billion gazillion times. So please leave advice. Please tell us what your issues are and help us make this better for you. So thanks, guys.